Good afternoon. I'm Hoge, IPI Senior Adviser for External Relations, and I'm happy to welcome you to this SRSG Series featuring Gerard Koenders, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the UN operation in Côte d'Ivoire, known as UNOCI. We started this SRSG series in 2006, and those of you who know my background as a New York Times foreign correspondent may not be surprised to learn that it is one of the favorite things of mine that we do at IPI, because it brings people from posts far from UN headquarters with real first-hand, eyewitness, on-the-ground experience into contact with the diplomatic and the policy community based here in New York. I consider these reports of the SRSG's dispatches from the front, and some of the countries that the series has focused on have been places of staggering challenges for the UN: Liberia, Syria, the Central African Republic and Chad, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Palestinian territories, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Côte d'Ivoire. Indeed, we had a predecessor of Gerard Koenders, or actually his predecessor, in the Côte d'Ivoire post, Choi Jung-yin of South Korea, here in 2009. And next Friday, we feature Parfait Onanga, the SRSG for Burundi, and we had his predecessor in that post, Karen Langren, here in July. Our final SRSG to appear here last year, Martin Kobler, was the third SRSG for Iraq to participate in our series. So I'm pleased to see these indications that SRSGs now consider it part of their responsibility to appear at IPI. And as I said, it provides those of us here with a valuable opportunity to enrich our understanding of the UN's work in the field. Albert Gerard Koenders, known as Bert, has been the SRSG for Côte d'Ivoire since August of 2011. He is a seasoned international policymaker on development, humanitarian, and governance issues, with experience in a number of the troubled countries I just mentioned. He has also been the Dutch Minister for Development Cooperation and a member of the Dutch House of Representatives. Côte d'Ivoire, once West Africa's most prosperous society, was sundered by a civil war a decade ago that left it divided north and south. And then more recently, it was convulsed by violence in which 3,000 people were killed and some 700,000 were forced to flee their homes during the 6 months following the November 2010 elections, when the loser, former President Laurent Gbagbo, refused to step down. In what was a test case for the continental commitment to enforcing democracy, the neighboring countries and the United Nations played critical roles in ensuring that the winner, Alassane Ouattara, eventually took office in May 2011. The United Nations also played a major role in seeing that Mr. Gbagbo was taken into custody, and he is now in the Netherlands awaiting trial by the International Criminal Court on charges of crimes against humanity. President Ouattara addressed an overflow audience in this room in September 2011, 4 months after taking office. And he said, quote, "The main issue that we're addressing is reconciliation." Elaborating on that point, he said he had to spread what he called the language of reconciliation throughout the country and its damaged institutions. And he listed among his goals stabilizing the country, restoring political dialogue, re-energizing the economy, and establishing the rule of law. UNOCI is charged in the Security Council resolution this past July, extending its mandate with supporting many of those same goals. And it amounts to a very challenging assignment for the United Nations. And as I said at the outset, nobody knows better what's happening in Côte d'Ivoire and with the UN mission there than someone based there and leading it on a daily basis. So, Bert, we are delighted that you are here today to talk about it, and the floor is yours.
I will give some of my personal reflections on leading a peacekeeping operation, which is a new activity for me. As you said, I was a Minister for Development Cooperation and a politician in my own country, working in a lot of conflict areas as well. But it's a great privilege to work now for the United Nations, and especially in Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire is a wonderful country. I'm not just saying that because I live there. It is a country with a very rich history, tradition, culture. It was always the economic powerhouse of Western Africa. It's a country that has a long tradition of accommodation and reconciliation among different groups. But as you said, it has also been characterized in the last 10, 15, 20 years by a cycle of different crises. And the United Nations is there now to assist the Ivorian government and the Ivorian society and the players there to come to terms with all these conflicts and go into a direction of peace and reconciliation. Let me say that I think the fact that we're talking today about Côte d'Ivoire is actually not only good because I work in Côte d'Ivoire and we think it's very important, and the ambassador is there from Côte d'Ivoire and some colleagues from the Security Council, but also we're looking at the moment, obviously, in West Africa, to a volatile region. And most of the discussions this week in the United Nations were around Mali. But I think the fact that there is a volatility in Mali that I would not want to discuss right now, it's not a topic of my talk, but it reinforces the need for Côte d'Ivoire to go as fast as possible, and there are very promising development in the direction of peace and stability. I think if you look to a situation of Côte d'Ivoire with about 40% of GDP of the region, 55% of the industrial production of Western Africa, which is now getting slowly back into business after long years of decay, it's very clear that Côte d'Ivoire can do two things. That is, export the stability in the region or import the instability of the region. And therefore we are also, for us, the developments in the regions are quite crucial. I will not go too much in the history because you have said quite a bit about it, but I cannot say nothing about it, because to understand what we are trying to do in cooperation with the Ivorians and catalyzing these changes that are necessary and were, I think, here expressed by President Ouattara, it's important maybe to say just a few things about that. As you said, the post-electoral crisis cost more than 3,000 lives, men, women, and children. And it tore, in my view, the fabric of the country further apart, a country that had already experienced a decade of recurrent crisis. And the peacekeeping operation, when my predecessor was here in 2009, obviously I don't know what he said, but the hope was of the international community that after long negotiations that had taken place on this complex crisis in the country, that the elections would be a recipe for the solution of the problem. And what we see often in countries also as peacekeepers, elections, very important, it's part of our toolbox. It helps to accommodate different groups. It legitimizes a new government, or it re-elects a former government. And it is sometimes also secretly seen by the peacekeepers as an exit strategy. And what did we see in Côte d'Ivoire? That those elections, those presidential elections in 2011 became, in fact, a recipe for new violence and not a solution to these problems. I think it's, first of all, a very important lesson for all of us who work in peacekeeping and peace and development, in democracy support. I think we've had those lessons before, but it's constantly difficult for us to internalize them. We've had the decade of Kenya, of Zimbabwe. If you look very carefully at the situation in Mali, there was also a certain wishful thinking about the democratic nature of that country and the popularity of the former president, ATT. So it learned us, I think, again, to look at these elections, but also for peacekeepers to ensure that there is always a planning for post-electoral violence. I'm obviously not saying that elections are not important, but they should be part, and we know that all, I think, after a couple of years, part of a system of the creation of reconciliation, of rule of law, of political party support, and so on and so forth. The victor in a conflict, and that is, I think, where we are right now, if we are in a period of optimism, in my view, on Africa, including of the situation in Côte d'Ivoire. And the situation in Mali has obviously is a very negative situation right now. But I would like to say that, you know, the lessons that I've learned, at least, the first lesson I wanted to see when I came into that mission, is to ensure that we learn those lessons well. If there is a democratic process, we better think about what are the different notions in the country about bureaucratic politics, personal politics, the winner takes all? Is there really a willingness to negotiate and work among each other, or is there a very risk in the societies we're working with of the opposite? The second introductory remark, and I won't make many more so that there's a lot of time to talk about the present and what we're doing, is I think one other element that in my view, but I'm definitely not the expert on that, and there are many experts here around the table. But if you look at the beginning of this cycle of violence in Côte d'Ivoire, it was a combination, I think, in the beginning of the 90s of very quick democratization, the end of the one-party state. And I remember that well. We have here the Secretary General of Parliamentarians for Global Action. I was then a parliamentarian in the Netherlands, and we visited Côte d'Ivoire several times with the then President Bédier, who was the president of the parliament. There was a whole discussion about the democratization, but the democratization took place in a period of very quick deterioration of cocoa prices, of the economy, of a high degree of international migration to the country, and the beginning of what became the politicization of the ethnicity in the country, the concept of ivoirité and all the risks that entailed. And it is good to realize that, because it is still something that we have to look at very carefully at the situation right now. These two elements are important. Elections are not necessarily a recipe, as we know, for accommodation, but they can be a necessary and important ingredient. We have, fortunately, in 2 months, date is not exactly again now, the local elections in Côte d'Ivoire. But we have to look very carefully at the conditions, at the possibilities of these elections to accommodate differences. And that's why now, as we speak in the country, there are quite a few initiatives taken by the government to discuss with the opposition the possibilities of having inclusive local elections, which would maybe even include independent members of the party of the former President Gbagbo or his party, depending on the outcome of the elections. And obviously, that's one of my jobs, to assist with good offices that this discussion takes place. Where are we now in Côte d'Ivoire? I mean, if I say democracy was the beginning of violence, and we had a cycle of decay in the country, of situations of no peace and no war. There was a coup d'etat. There has been disinvestment. If you look to some of the Millennium Development Goals, Côte d'Ivoire was a shining example of the region, but if you look to some of the maternal mortality rates, for instance, in the northwest and the northeast of the country, they are not better than, for instance, in Niger or in Mali. So it means that the poverty has risen very quickly, a lot of disinvestment, more scarcity, and a period and a cycle of violence, and then it is not easy to come to the situation we are right now, the reconstruction, reconciliation, as President Ouattara said, along these 3 lines, basically the first one being security. I think that is absolutely crucial from my point of view as a head of the peacekeeping operation. We are there with over 9,000 military personnel, with over 1,000 police personnel, with civilians. It is absolutely crucial that we start with security. Security first. Human development can only work if there is security and human security. Where are we on the human security, and what are we actually doing? There are two priorities there for the peacekeeping operation. One is obviously protection of civilians, a hotly debated issue on the role of the United Nations on what can they actually do on protection of civilians, under what conditions, in which areas, with what weaponry. But as an SRSG, I take this extremely serious. Protection of civilians, in my view, a large responsibility for the United Nations, but always in close cooperation with the government. The second is security sector reform and demobilization, disarmament and reintegration. Now, I think that here for us at the moment there are the main challenges. In the post-crisis situation that we've seen in Côte d'Ivoire, there was the necessity to ensure that the new army, the FRCI, and the police and the gendarmerie would go and work together in a way that makes sense for this goal of human security. That is still a major challenge. It's still a major challenge. Confidence within the armed forces and between the armed forces and the police and gendarmerie. We have discussed that this week with the Security Council. It is also discussed, obviously, with the government. Is a major it is of major importance for our role as the United Nations to support that process. Why? human security can only be supported at the moment that we know that the army is back in the barracks, that there is a demobilization process, and that the police and gendarmerie is doing actually the work of public protection of people. That shift is still a very difficult one in Côte d'Ivoire. The government has taken initiatives which are very important. First, we have had the first DDR process, but everybody knows that DDR is not just a technical issue. It's a very highly political issue. How do you ensure that people are demobilized, that it happens in a politically balanced way, that it's transparent, and first and foremost, that there is a relationship between this disarmament and the reinsertion and reintegration. That's the first element. We are making progress on that, but it remains a major challenge because obviously if you have an army which is made up of different factions of the former regime and by the Force Nouvelle, it is always a challenge how you build that confidence, the command and control system, to ensure that the citizens feel comfortable. It is one of our main challenges together with our Ivorian partners. We have started, President Ouattara has clearly shown after the attacks that we have seen during the summer, which was basically a sort of a backlash after all the progress that we have seen since the post-electoral crisis, that this security issue is also crucial for the economic development of the country. So our first foremost priority are protection of civilians, SSR and DDR, and working with our Ivorian partners also on regional security. One of our priorities is working with our colleagues in Liberia. Intermission cooperation is an instrument which I think could be used even more within United Nations peacekeeping. We have a very porous border between the Ivory Coast and Liberia. We work together as two missions to ensure that there's patrolling on both sides, that there is better intelligence sharing, but also that we look at the root causes of the conflict, so that in terms of our humanitarian aid, the return of refugees, the security for these refugees that are returning, the work with traditional leaders on both sides of the border, that also these root causes are actually tackled. And obviously this is part of something where we support the Ivorian and the Liberian authorities to do so. And I would say more generally that we have seen in 2012 a difficult year. It was a year with a lot of progress in terms of security, economic development, and also human security, where we have seen these attacks. These attacks were very serious, and they showed some of the radicalization of parts of the opposition, as well as the vulnerability of the security sector, and therefore we see this as an absolute priority to do in Côte d'Ivoire. Protection of civilians, we can maybe in a discussion discuss that a little bit more. It includes, of course, instructions that we have given to our forces also to do so. We have decentralized our mission. We have ensured also that on issues of sexual violence, which remain of concern in the country, we are actually ensuring that we have the contacts and that we have the confidence as much as possible of the citizens of Côte d'Ivoire to do our work. The second, and I will only mention 3 priorities, because the peacekeepers are very, very good in having too many priorities. And of course we will, I'm glad that the Ambassador Rosenthal is there as representing here Guatemala in the Security Council. Our mandates are very long and very complex, and of course we are going to do everything. But obviously also in terms of priorities, you have to ensure that you make a difference. Peacekeepers are not there to stay forever. They can either, it's like a dinner party, they can go too early or they go too late. And to find the right timing of leaving is not always easy. And we have to be very vigilant on this. I would characterize the timing we're now in Côte d'Ivoire as peace building, but with an enormous amount of vigilance. And that creates a lot of issues for a peacekeeping mission. Because you have to work on all these issues of security and where I'm coming now, political dialogue, reconciliation and economic development, but you have to prioritize. You cannot do everything. And on the basis of your mandate, you really have to say, what is my strategy to work with the local partners so that in a few years or in a few months, they can do the work. It's not our work imposing on the country. We are building on the basis of demand, and the demand is crucial. On this second element of political dialogue, national reconciliation, justice and human rights, I think you are right in saying that this was President Ouattara's first priority. I think there's also a lot of work still to be done. Again, there we see progress. We see a line that goes upwards. We see now, as we speak, a certain consolidation with a new, smaller government in the Ivory Coast, and also, therefore, more confidence to go outside, to talk to the opposition.
And we now have to see to what extent also the opposition is in the process of discussing with the government, for instance, to have inclusive local elections. But reconciliation and national dialogue is obviously much more than that. There is a commission in the Côte d'Ivoire, the commission that deals with dialogue and reconciliation, supported by the United Nations, which the key is, with an Ivorian stamp on it, with the Ivorian concerns, the concerns of the men and women of the Ivory Coast, how they can find their reconciliation among themselves. And you see the struggle now taking place of how to do that the best, to ensure that it is also going now to the different provinces, that there are committees, that people can speak out, tell the truth, feel protected and secure to do so, and to ensure that equitable justice is being implemented in the country. What do we do as peacekeepers? It's not only, of the peacekeeping operation, it's not only supporting this, but also ensuring that in the decentralization of our offices, we help in conflict prevention in the different regions of the country, and to assist also the reconciliation process. Very important. We do our good offices work, obviously, in working with the different political parties, with the government, with the confidence building, sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes more openly. We are strengthening the human rights capacity. There's still concerns on human rights in Côte d'Ivoire. That's why we work on prevention and construction. We have the training programs with the FRCI, the army. We work with new institutions. I think it's extremely important, including the issue of legal reform. Don't forget that a country that has been in crisis, like the Côte d'Ivoire, there was a lot of devastation in the prisons, in the legal system, in terms of having the expertise, of having a balanced approach to that expertise, not politicized, but in terms of neutral, in leading to justice reform, etc., etc. We have chosen with the government, but also with the civil society and all the partners, where we can make a difference. And the difference can only be catalytic. We cannot stay for 10 years for justice reform. The Ivorians can do that themselves. But in the next period, the citizens, I think, have to see that there is hope and that there is difference. So these catalytic changes, in my view, the role of peacekeepers. Prioritize in these three sectors, find out locally what is the most important in terms of catalyzing the change wished by the Ivorians, and be there in a supporting role. If I talk about that second element, security was first, second is then political dialogue, reconciliation, justice and human rights. It is crucial, I think, the few issues that received the attention also this week. One was on the issue of sexual violence, something that has our attention and also the attention of the government. The second is the issue of the parliament. The parliament was elected. I had still a special representative, a certification role there. We still have, I think, 4 constituencies to go of elections in February. And I think also the parliament will and therefore we need a lot of interparliamentary cooperation, I think, as well, on the key issues of reconciliation and land and identity and so on. Cooperation that is international. The third priority, and that's the last one, because if you have too many, then you can forget your work because you do everything and in the end people see nothing, is to give a boost to economic development. In economic development, we work very closely with the UN country team on the basis of the National Development Plan of the government of Côte d'Ivoire. They were very successful in Paris just a few weeks ago, of, I think, Ambassador, if I'm not mistaken, doubling the figure that was asked for by the Ivorian government. So that shows also sort of a trust and the need at the same time to work on the issues of economic development. The 2 or 3 issues that are very key there, I think. Of course, the president is a very famous economist. So, I mean, you know, he knows, he has a vision of the country, and he will give this leadership. For peacekeepers, the issue will be, again, the relationship between the short and the medium term. You can have very good investors coming, long-term development, road building, but especially the youth unemployment and the fact that the youngsters who come and have to be demobilized, and those who are in the slums of some of the cities, that they are not going to be part of a new radicalization or a new taking up of arms, and the country is still full of arms. We have to prioritize also the timing of this youth employment creation. We're working now in a plan with the Minister of Social Affairs on this, but it's important that we also innovate our work in public-private partnerships. I've worked now with the cacao sector, for instance, a value chain which is crucial for Côte d'Ivoire. It's the largest exporter of cacao. And it's very interesting to work with the private sector, with the government, with civil society to ensure that in the short term, the sustainability of cacao production, which is so crucial also for the country, will lead to job opportunities and at the same time to sustainable cacao production as just an example. So here the priority is catalytic development programs. Now, in conclusion, maybe a few words about where we are in terms of all this work. It's always important, and I underlined that, I think, this afternoon, to go in the security field, but also in the issue of institution building, reconciliation, human rights, and economic development from a role of substitution to support. I think that's crucial for a peacekeeping operation. Secondly, I think it's important that we prioritize, and if I can take two among all this work we've done, which will be, I think, determining for the next year, after the mixed security situation and still fragile situation in the country in 2012, is to bring forward the nexus of SSR, DDR, and dialogue and reconciliation. They are linked. Without reconciliation and dialogue, it's very difficult to progress on SSR and DDR. And if you want to progress on SSR and DDR, which is so crucial for the security, human security of the citizens, but also the security of the country as a whole, you have to proceed on the other volet. I think there are hopeful signs. There's the beginning of a DDR process, as I said, with certain lessons to be learned. There's the beginning of larger programs of confidence building within the army and between the armed forces and the police and the gendarmerie. There's the beginning of a political opening also as we speak. But the crucial point will be in 2013 to ensure that we make the link between peace building and the root causes of the conflict in Côte d'Ivoire. And I just wanted to single out one, that is land. The issues of land were crucial in the formation of the conflicts we've seen in the past year, not only in the West, but also in the North. The government has the first responsibility. They're working about what kind of a land law they want to adapt or a new one. But the peacekeepers are there also to help to mediate land conflicts in the meantime. In a heavily politicized society as Côte d'Ivoire, the analysis has often been made by outsiders by saying it's politicized and a lot of the problems locally have to do with the fact that people were mobilized nationally by different ethno-political groups. But it can also work the other way around. We have to look at local conflicts in terms of land and identity to mitigate them and to ensure that they don't increase the national conflicts. The 2013 juncture where we are right now is, I think, this one. Progress has been made. I think that's positive. It should be recognized, both in terms of political psychology, but also as recognition of what Côte d'Ivoire and the Ivorians doing after a very difficult period. It's now the time to ensure that it is consolidated. For this consolidation, the support of the international community is needed. Of course, we always go to a cycle of different conflicts. Côte d'Ivoire remains important. 40% of the GDP, 55% of the industrial production of the country. So that is my plea, obviously, also, and I had the support of the Security Council this week to continue our work as peacekeepers, to prioritize that, and to think also in terms of if the dinner is, when the dinner guests should leave, that we are vigilant on the situation there, also in view of the regional setting. These are a few of my thoughts on this.
Thank you, Bert. We'll keep the conversation going here. I want to just tell you one anecdote that your dinner party image reminds me of. 3 years ago, we had the SRSG for Chad and CAR. I think it's one position. The Central African Republic and Chad, it's one position. And he arrived as SRSG on the very date by which the Chadian government had asked the UN to leave. I'm happy to say he did the job so well that he is now my colleague here. I'm speaking about Yusuf Mahmoud, who is now a senior advisor here at IPI. But that was a really tricky thing, to arrive at the dinner party at the hour by which you were supposed to be leaving it. I want to ask you a couple of questions and then get some questions from the floor. The first thing I want to ask you, Bert, is I can think of few situations, few countries where the UN has been as actively involved in a transition as it has over the past year in the Côte d'Ivoire. After all, it was UN forces who were protecting Alassane Ouattara as he was in a hotel while Gbagbo was still holed up in the presidential palace. I think you even got into a shooting war at one point, peacekeepers firing at troops. And also the UN had a lot to do with facilitating the removal of Gbagbo and to the Netherlands, and where he will, we all hope, stand trial. My question is, has that involvement made the UN presence more appreciated, more suspect? What is the image, do you think, that the UN has there? And does it help you that the UN has been so actively identified with the outcome of this political?
If you know, I'm now an SRSD, not a minister for the Netherlands. So I have to be a bit more careful about what I say, but I need to correct you a little bit on the facts. Yes, it's true that we played a crucial role, the United Nations, during the post-electoral crisis. I think a crucial role which should be mentioned. The SRSG had a certification role. That means that he was very important in giving an assessment of the outcome of the elections. A very specific mandate, which not many SRSDs have. It's a personal mandate even. It's not given to the mission, but to the SRSG. You're correct in saying that was crucial at that time, including the use of military force at the moment that the UN Security Council adopted a resolution to protect civilians against the use of heavy weapons by some of the, in fact, the pro-Gbagbo forces at the time. So in that sense, it was a crucial role, absolutely true, in ensuring the outcome of the elections. We were not involved in the arrest or the transfer of former President Gbagbo to The Hague. It's important to say that because of your third question. It's not to correct you because of a simple fact, but it is important that, of course, we have the confidence of all Ivorians. We are, of course, there at the invitation of a democratically elected government, but of course we are there also to ensure that we can be players and good officers to everybody in the country. So the confidence among all parties in the country, I think, is at the moment pretty large. But I've been building that confidence in the last year by ensuring that we are open to all partners and all Ivorians, because, of course, our role is to have the good officers, and that's also appreciated by the authorities, and I think also by members of other parties in the opposition. Now, if we always get a good press or not is another thing, but that's I think part of any UN operation.
The other thing I want to ask you, and you made a reference to it in your remarks, a couple of cases where, well, let me start this way. Half the country voted for Gbagbo, and I want to know where. Are those people now reconciled to Ouattara as their president? And what's on my mind is the attacks on Ivorian soldiers and police this summer that killed 20 people. Also attacks on peacekeepers. Is there any fear that there's a regional aspect to this, that the people who are attacking Ivorian troops, that are attacking UN peacekeepers, may be linked to people in the region who are causing the kinds of problems that are being caused now in Mali, where even the name of Al-Qaeda comes up? Yes. Is there a connection?
It's a very good question. Let me first say that the attacks that we have seen during the summer, which shocked us all, including, as you say, the deaths of peacekeepers, which was, I think, the most difficult mission for all of us, including me personally as the SRSG. We had to lose 7 peacekeepers because of an attack.
And of course, those peacekeepers were from Niger, right next door.
They were from Niger, and it was very painful. Many people get killed in conflicts, but it's also a crime against humanity, as you know, when peacekeepers are killed. There have been people arrested on that, some of that in Liberia and others in Côte d'Ivoire. They will have to come before a judge. It's for me not to comment on who did what or when or how. A judge will have to determine that. But there is, and that is more to go more openly in your question, we're talking about a regional issue, and we had proof, and there was proof, let me put it that way, that there were contacts between some elements related to the former President Gbagbo and people who organized some of these attacks. I'm very precise because it's not, to ensure that it's not only from that side. But it includes that, and it's important to note that, and therefore the regional cooperation between Ghana and Liberia, and also in the region, was extremely important for those who are suspected of crimes, that there is a good cooperation according to international norms. I have myself worked very strongly on that. We work, as I said, with Liberia on UNMIL and UNOCI to ensure also that the root causes of these problems, refugee return, confidence building, are being helped, and the same is with Ghana.
The last thing I want to ask you before we go to the floor is, when the President was here, he spoke specifically about his desire to create a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Has that happened?
Yes, that has happened. There is a commission actually with that name under the leadership of the former Prime Minister Bani. We are closely working with them. They have 2 years in an extensive program to work on reconciliation at the national, but also at the local level. They have just opened offices in the different regions where they're working on these issues of truth, of witnesses, of speaking out. There is also set up by the government, which I think is very positive, a commission d'enquête, which looked at all the post-electoral violence after 2011. They have reported to the president, and he has put that in the hands of the Justice Ministry in order to ensure that those people who perpetrated these acts are being prosecuted. We are assisting also the government in helping it to do the technical support for these investigations. It is important, of course, that for the Ivorians there is an image there that these people get prosecuted and there is an end to impunity. And this balance between impunity and reconciliation is always a national one, and which is a difficult one. And the Ivorians are trying to find out the best way to do that right now.
Excellent. Please, I'd love to have some questions from the floor, right here in the third row.
Thank you, Mr. Koenders. This was very interesting. My name is Thilo Stolz. I'm in the Security Council Affairs Division in DPA, and we deal with these different Security Council committees, including the Committee on Côte d'Ivoire, which oversees the sanctions regime, and then there's the expert group. And I just was wondering what sort of your view on the current status of the targeted sanctions regime and its future. Is there a need to have more listing or the threat of listing of possible spoilers of the peace process? I think Mr. Blegoudi is still on the subject to the assets freeze and the travel ban. Then there's the diamond embargo. Should that eventually be lifted? Should that be tied to joining the Kimberley process? And also the arms embargo, should that eventually be transformed like was done in Liberia, that there's only a notification requirement for arms that goes to the government, but no longer a need for committee approval, and only to remain to have the arms embargo against non-state actors like it's in Liberia now. Just sort of your views on that, and also the work or cooperation between also whether the arms embargo monitoring unit in UNOCI, could that be replicated for other peacekeeping missions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, on the embargo regime, yes, it's true. We have a strong embargo unit in UNOCI, which is seen as something that could be used maybe also for other missions, including a very good arms expert. And we are doing, as you know, on-site inspections in the country. I'm overseeing that. It's important that the embargo is obviously respected. That's point number one. Secondly, I think the government is engaged in the Kimberley process. I think there have been recent missions also to Côte d'Ivoire to ensure that these kind of issues of how you deal with diamond production and exports and so on are according to the Kimberley regime. I know there are discussions there with the government of Côte d'Ivoire, who've taken their own initiatives on that. The third issue is the future of the embargo regime. Now here I have a problem because obviously that's not my formal prerogative, especially since also we have people in the room who are actually chairing the sanctions committee. But let me say one or two things, not to hide my own views on this. But it's a personal view. In my view, the future of the embargo will have to be related to the progress in SSR and DDR. I think that is more or less the best answer that I can give, and it's also not controversial and it's very logical. You don't do an embargo for itself. There is also, as you know, a lot of possibilities among certain requests that come from the government to make an exception when we are building up the new police, for instance, or the gendarmerie. This is a prerogative of the national government to ask for those exceptions. It's for the sanctions committee to decide on this. The SRSG have no role in that in formal terms. But there is a logical relationship, in my view, in general, between an embargo and an SSR and DDR process that is successful.
A gentleman I think I'll take two at once here. Gentleman there, and then John Hirsch in the front, and then we'll get a few others later. But we'll take two at once, okay? So.
Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry.
Thanks. I'm Renzo Pomey with Amnesty International. Thank you for the information, and thanks to IPI. The question is on the peculiar situation we have now with the former president having been transferred to The Hague, and his wife having been requested to be transferred to The Hague as well. And even though I might understand that you could not comment on whether the government will decide to go the same way with the second request, I wanted to ask you whether you consider that perhaps the changes in the judicial system in Côte d'Ivoire could indicate a possible change in the attitude by the government, meaning that the question perhaps is, do you think that the judicial system in Côte d'Ivoire, according to the work of UNOCI, is a system that would guarantee a fair prosecution and trial for Mrs. Gbagbo in Côte d'Ivoire? And just to very briefly, you mentioned that UNOCI was not involved in the transfer of Mr. Gbagbo, and perhaps a general question is, what is the current cooperation that your mission has with the ICC and their investigations and other actions? Thanks.
As you wanted to.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
You know, the issue of the International Criminal Court in Côte d'Ivoire is obviously a very sensitive one. I'm not saying that just because that's an easier answer for me. It's sensitive for very good reasons. There is a former president who is in The Hague, and obviously in a politicized society, in any society where there's been a crisis, that remains news every day. But I'm really going to give you a very formal answer. It is really up to the government of Côte d'Ivoire to decide on the transfer to The Hague or not. That is really not my prerogative. I don't have any opinion on this. As you know better than I the rules. If there is a national equivalent, there are all kinds of possibilities. I leave that up to the government of Côte d'Ivoire. I cannot comment on that further.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, John Hirsch.
First of all, thank you very much for your comments today, and also I find what you have had to say very encouraging as to what the UN is you and your colleagues are trying to accomplish. As you know, as everybody here knows, the UN has been involved in a number of countries in West Africa, including Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, and now there's the situation in Mali. So, very complicated situation. I wonder if you could offer some thoughts on lessons learned, to use such a phrase, or experiences that are germane, if you prefer, from your time in Côte d'Ivoire that are relevant to and are applicable to what's going on in Mali. Mali is not only a question of ending the insurgency, very difficult, but it has to do with sort of bringing people together, the army and all these different political groups that are at odds with each other in Bamako. So I wonder if you could offer a few thoughts that relate what you're doing and your whole career, but particularly your Côte d'Ivoire experience, to this huge challenge in Mali.
Thank you very much. This is not an easy question because it's, as you know, a very complex situation. I have visited, and I'm saying that in a personal capacity as Minister for Development Cooperation of the Netherlands, quite a few times in Mali. And I think we all were aware of the complexity, the size of the country, and the enormous problems it had internally as a transfer of drugs and trafficking, which enormous amount of money is involved. Money that can be used for good purposes or for bad purposes. So the destabilization in Mali started also with this whole issue of trans-border crime and drugs and so on and so forth. I think it's important to note that, because that problem remains with us. That's not gone. That's still a major engine to some of the problems we're faced with, I think, as an international community. Second, it is the crucial issue for Mali, and again, I'm not an expert, but this is a personal comment on this, is how the post-colonial state of Mali can manage its diversity. That has always remained an issue very complicated with the Tuaregs and with the central government. And that is, in essence, a political issue and needs a political resolution, in my view. And of course, that's now quite complicated because of the outflow of the Libyan war, of the radicalization, the involvement of terrorist groups, and so on and so forth. But that issue in itself remains, of course, important. The third is that in Mali, I don't like the word international community, which, as you know, that doesn't exist. But many, and let me include myself, I don't think have necessarily well analyzed what was happening in Mali. ATT was seen for many years as a very popular president, and there was a certain politics of the good intentions to say that this was the star of democracy in Western Africa. Now, what we see now is much worse, obviously, with the coup d'etat, with the partition of the country, with the issues that have been happened in the army, with the enormous problems of the Islamic-inspired terror and so on and so forth. But I'm more looking at lessons learned of what the background of the crisis is. I'm not in a position to make any judgment at this stage. It's clear that some of the ideas about how this could be planned through ECOWAS and the timing of that is now completely changed. And therefore we're in a new setting, and it's up now to the Security Council to determine what kind of support the United Nations should give. But in my view, in any way, it's important that this political element, and I'm saying that as a person, not as an official representative of the United Nations, that this issue of who negotiates with whom should have Malian ownership. That the issue of conflicts that are still in Bamako should be at least also have a political angle of negotiations to it. And that obviously also support has to be given for those who want to defend civilians against attacks from, in this case, terror. These are three elements, and it's now up to, obviously, France and ECOWAS and the Security Council to determine the mixture of activities to ensure that they have an appropriate reaction.
Okay, let me go to Jeff Laurenti and then the woman over here. And I think I saw a third hand, didn't I? Very good. Okay.
Jeff Laurenti with the Century Foundation. Mr. Koenders, first, John Hirsch's question, running through the list of countries in West Africa that are themselves subject of peacekeeping operations. You wonder, where can you get troops from West Africa for your own peacekeeping operation or others there? And so if you might comment a bit about actually the security presence that you all are still guaranteeing and how the troops are viewed by the Ivoirian population, welcomed or seen as somewhat alien? Are they beginning to overstay their welcome as far as you can say? Then the question I really wanted to pose was, since you had made several references to already entering the peace-building phase, to what extent does your budget already provide in the peacekeeping operation the cornerstones of peace-building? What are the areas that are being funded out of your budget that can be said to be the building of the new long-term stability in Côte d'Ivoire? And what are the other bigger development funders, the World Bank, some of the UN funding programs, and even the bilateral ones, already at this relatively early stage, willing to put on the ground when the peace is not yet built, if you catch what I mean?
I think since that was two questions, I think we'll wait on the other two and just answer those two.
Thank you very much. It was also related to your question. I think we have to cherish, I'm not just saying that because I'm a UN special representative, but also many successes of peacekeeping in the recent period. We know that there are all major issues in Eastern Congo and how to deal with Syria, where where was only observers. But I think in West Africa, including in the countries you mentioned, Sierra Leone and Liberia, there are major successes, in my view, against relatively low cost. And that is the essence, in my view, of peacekeeping, in gaining time for local actors to accommodate according to their calendar with support from the international community. It's maybe a very limited goal, but it's a very crucial role. And we have activities to support that. And I'm very happy that we see of some of those countries, now not the two I mentioned, but we have many West African troops. This mission started a long time ago before I came there. As also in an ECOWAS and later UN setting. So we have many troops from the region, but also from outside the region, obviously, including from Bangladesh and Pakistan. But I have seen never in Côte d'Ivoire any negative reactions to the nationality of some of our troops. The Ivorians have been very welcoming of all the different nationalities. I'm not talking about the UN as a whole necessarily, that's always a confidence-building measure. And I'm proud of what they're doing in Côte d'Ivoire. That's the first element of your question. The second was on peace building. Now, I have to watch out because I might actually make mistakes in the definitions, because these definitions are often bureaucratic. And they deal then also with budgets. And I'm not in front of the ACABQ right now, so I can go. But the crucial point is, how do you define a situation? I've called it now, and it's my definition, maybe it's a wrong one when I look at the books, but it's peace building with vigilance. It's not necessarily post-conflict. The term post-conflict I've never liked. In any country you have a conflict, and any development process is a conflictuous process. So there's always an issue of conflict. The question is, do you mitigate it? Is it being used productively or not? That's the question. On peace building, yes, peacekeeping and peace building, we are there to ensure as a deterrent and assist the Ivorians in creating this time to find reconciliation, to find accommodation, and in the meantime rebuild the institutions to the extent they were destroyed. Of course, a lot that stays as it was. And so some of the funds are used for that. For instance, on judicial reform, on the penitentiary system, very important, on the support for the building up of new human rights structures, the support for work programs that we do directly with the government of Côte d'Ivoire on all kinds of different issues which are about strengthening the capacity to cope with the post-conflict areas. Of course, that's always a minor part of the total peacekeeping budget. I mean, the large peacekeeping budget is all salaries, military and police. But we have integrated this with the UN country team. And the UN country team worked with us in 190 and 180 plans, which are very specific and operational, on the key priorities they find in their regions. And they are exactly the same priorities as the government has put. Human security is in some region different than others. It can have something to do with the dozos. It can have something to do with helping the préfet in setting up local security committees. It can have something to do with a land issue that has to be accommodated. We cannot move that all from Abidjan. But there are funds involved where we work together in ensuring that the problems are mitigated and we assist in finding more permanent solutions.
Woman on the aisle, and then when you've asked your question, just pass the microphone over to Anthony next to you.
Hi, my name is Anna Fritsche. I'm with Crisis Action. I was wondering about what you said about the importance of remaining vigilant. And you mentioned that 2013 is a bit of a year of a juncture for Côte d'Ivoire. So I was wondering, in your assessment, how fragile is the situation and how volatile is Côte d'Ivoire to renewed outbreaking of conflict? If you had to give like an informed risk assessment, maybe if you like on a scale from 1 to 10, what would you say?
Hold that question and we'll get a question from Anthony.
Thank you. And If you don't mind, I'll be a little greedy and ask two very brief questions. The first one has to do with security sector
Anthony,
reform.
introduce yourself, please.
Sorry, Anthony Simpson from the New Zealand Permanent Mission. The first has to do with SSR and DDR. I think we've seen some pretty stark examples in the past 12 months of the sometimes quite catastrophic results of even years after the end of a conflict of not properly addressing SSR and DDR. And to turn around one of the previous questions, I wonder what lessons you may have learned from a couple of the more recent failures to adequately address this that you want to make sure that you don't repeat in the context of Côte d'Ivoire. Second question relates to your interesting comments on addressing the root causes of conflict. I'd be interested in your, you talked about having a catalytic role, but I'd be very interested in your more specific comments about specifically what the most appropriate and useful role is that UN missions can play in addressing those things like land tenure, employment generation, and so forth, and how well equipped you feel that you are and other missions may be to do those effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to apologize to the first question, the question that was raised. I'm not going to give you a figure, and I'll tell you also why, because it's very risky, not so much for me, but frankly, it doesn't make much sense. Go into your own country and you have certain problems and you have to make a figure from 1 to 10. The risk, I think, with post-conflict situation is that you come in cycles of optimism and pessimism and is the glass half full or half empty? And in the end, they don't help much in terms of what you want to do. That's why I think I've used the word vigilant. For me, there is no question that since the post-electoral crisis, I've described that also to the reports in the Security Council, there's progress in Côte d'Ivoire. Institutions are being built, the parliament is elected, the economic growth figures are 8.5%, etc. At the same time, we know, and all Ivorians know, the government knows with us, that together we have to tackle a few problems that were at the basis of these conflicts, including reconciliation, inclusive SSR and DDR. Now, again, there we are starting. Why I say vigilance? Because I've also learned from the year that I'm there. There's a lot of progress, but we also had attacks in the middle of the year. Unfortunately, we have them much less right now. And I can say, yeah, okay, so in the cycle of goes well or not well, I see a line with hope, with progress, but everybody who has studied conflict situations knows that the first 2, 3, 4 years are determining to what extent it's consolidated or not. And I'm optimistic about the Côte d'Ivoire, but I'm vigilant. And I better be vigilant, otherwise we don't have to be there. I'm sorry that I maybe don't give you the answer real, but the second is on lessons learned for SSR and DDR. SSR and DDR has, like in all countries, is a very difficult process. And I commend the Ivorian government that they have started to build a National Security Council under the leadership of the president, that they have started with a DDR process, that they are working on security sector reform, that the president has taken that in his own hands. So first of all, that's already very important. When I came to Côte d'Ivoire, there were I don't know how many institutions working on that, not necessarily in a coordinated way, guided by the leadership of their president. It's a big advantage. I have a lot of lessons learned because I worked in this before, and frankly, in my own country, spent a lot of money on it. And today I'm not in front of the Dutch Parliament, but that would be another moment. But we have a few lessons learned, and I think we have shared them with the government. And they are, first of all, there has to be a credible database and good criteria for eligibility that are based on a consensus. And it has to be balanced. That's the first 3 points. And they're also in the report of the Secretary General to the Security Council. The fourth is the most difficult one. It's the link with reintegration. And there we need everybody. Yeah, the peacekeeping operation cannot do that. It is billions of dollars. But not necessarily always extra money that comes in. It's the guiding of that money towards communities from which demobilized soldiers came. But you have to understand the local market. Demobilization in Côte d'Ivoire is not demobilization in your country or in my country or in Mali, and et cetera, et cetera. It's very locally specific. On SSR, in the end, SSR
has two components in my view. One is a sort of a holistic vision that you need democratic oversight, sensibilization, that there's a good relationship between the security forces, police and gendarmerie, and the population. Now, because of the crisis, that confidence is not always there. So it's a key area to invest in that. It's part actually of the work program right now. And the third element, the second element of that is, of course, this issue of confidence building. That is also highly context specific. And we're working therefore also with the Ministry of the Interior in a program of police reform to 2015, which include issues of recruitment and vetting and so on. I can't go too much in the details, but also the report of the Secretary General on Côte d'Ivoire gives, I think, some of these opportunities right now, some of the risks, and the way how we can cooperate with the actors in the country to ensure that it's a process. There's one big lesson. Really, it's a big lesson. It's really, this is the appropriation of the national government of the Ivory Coast. I don't know any imposed DDR-SSR process that has been successful when it was put by others, including the United Nations, on a country. I forget the question on, yes, I'm sorry, on catalytic role. And well, the catalytic role, I learned from, and there's so many good relationships now between the United Nations and the World Bank, so I can easily say that. The World Bank had a great report on post-conflict. So it's basically, you need to be catalytic in three areas: jobs, security, and justice. And that's actually exactly also the priorities of the governments, the priorities of all UN peacekeeping officers. And you look within those three areas, jobs, security, and justice, what you could do. Now on land, I told you an example of land. I cannot solve the land problems of Côte d'Ivoire. It would be very arrogant. We have nothing that's for the Ivorians to determine. They have their history, they have the traditions. There's communal land, there's land that is owned by different people. We've been very controversial. We can assist in, and that I think can sometimes be very important, in the technical issues of building the cadastres and so on, like that, in mitigating conflict, helping also the local administration with that, and working with the parliament to assist that there is an inclusive process of formation of decisions. But obviously this is an Ivorian decision, and we can be helpful in that process of finding consensus in order to ensure that these root causes of the conflict is going in a direction that is more consensual.
In the front row? Oh, I'm sorry, in the back. Well, we'll start in the front row, and there was another question there. Am I missing a hand? Oh, in the back, okay. We'll start here in the front row.
Shazia Rafi, Secretary General of Parliamentarians for Global Action. I must say it's a real pleasure to see Bert Koenders here, the former not only member of PGA, but also former staff of PGA. Yes. And Côte d'Ivoire is one where we have, as you said, worked together. I'm going to ask you to stand up, just for the people in the back, if you would, please. Thank you. I want to just ask two questions. One related to the issue of land, as you have raised just now, as the big issue facing the government, including land laws, etc., and what kind of reform should take place. As we had done in 2002, 2003 together on the issue of migration, nationality, etc., would a seminar that brought together, let's say, parliamentarians who have dealt with land reform issues in other transitions around the world be of help to the government and to the parliament, because we would be very pleased to do so. We had done so in Zimbabwe, actually, around the same years, bringing people from Mexico as well as West Africa, which might be an interesting thing. The other is, when you're talking about intermission cooperation, to what extent are you also working with the ECOWAS Parliament and its committees? Because in a certain sense, reconciliation and cooperation across these several UN missions, those are also represented now in the parliamentary regional process. And that is getting stronger in several of these issues that you have dealt with. Thank you.
There's one last question in the back, and I want to get that before we finish. Yo.
Hi, my name is Udi Whittelson from the UN Secretariat. Thank you very much for the IPI for hosting this session, and for the SRSG for your words. I have two short questions. One is in regards to the drug trade in Côte d'Ivoire, and how does that, in your experience, affect what you just mentioned regarding the infrastructure of jobs, security, and justice, because that has a potentially undermining factor. And the other question is in relation to the coordination of activities between various donor states, specifically in Côte d'Ivoire, but also how do they coordinate the activities of SSR and DDR on a regional perspective?
These will be the last questions, so.
Thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Zia. It's great that you are here. Parliamentarians in Global Action has been a very crucial organization, I think, in supporting a lot of the United Nations work. And actually, we were in Côte d'Ivoire already, I think, in the beginning of the 90s, where I made a lot of contacts that are actually quite useful even today. On the issue of land and the role of the Parliament, from the perspective of everything should be demand-driven, I actually can tell you that I remember having discussed this issue with the President of the Parliament, former Prime Minister Soro, and we were actually looking at a work plan of working together with others, and one of the issues is land. So in that sense, I think, I cannot speak obviously on behalf of him, but I think that there is an interest there, I'm sure, in the Parliament of Côte d'Ivoire. A very straight answer on the second question, we do not have contacts with the ECOWAS Parliament, if that's a good or a bad thing, but we don't. And maybe we should, and it's a very good suggestion to do so. On the issue of the drug trade, I would look at a bit more at the regional setting. I don't think at this point it's obviously of concern also to the government of Côte d'Ivoire, like it's of any government. But I don't think it's in Côte d'Ivoire at the moment and a determining factor in some of the issues I've discussed so far. In terms of the regional issues of transnational crime, including drugs trafficking, but including also piracy and so on and so forth, there are important initiatives regionally by ECOWAS, by the Mano River Union, but also bilaterally with support of the United Nations. The WACI initiative is one of them, that looks at tackling this problem. And it's my sincere belief that some of those initiatives should be supported by the international community, and it's been done a bit belatedly, frankly, and a bit overly bureaucratic. There is really a need to look seriously at these issues, and these issues are not tackled with in all kind of, tiny, small projects in which, there are a few consultants going left or right. It really requires the support of a regional strategy, because everybody who knows well what happened in some other areas of the world, drug trafficking can very quickly change a region, create parallel structures. But I have no indication whatsoever that it is the case in Côte d'Ivoire. So in that sense, I'm positive. The last question was on donor coordination and SSR and DDR. There UNOCI has an absolutely crucial role. The United Nations is there to assist the international support to the Ivorian actors on SSR and DDR. So we have a meeting with the donors, I think every week or every 10 days. I regularly meet with ambassadors. We try to look at where we can give our support, how specific it can be. It is always a very complex process, and we need to be there to support it because it's a priority of my mandate. It's very clear, the Security Council has said protection and surveillance, but DDR priorities in what you have to do. So we do that.
Bert Koenders, I want to thank you in particular for fulfilling my faith in this program as a way of bringing really experienced commentary from the ground to us in New York. Thank you.